All right, so I'm going to share my screen and let's talk about a little bit of history and the atom. So I presume that you can see that one. Amaya, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So where I want to start this story um, is way, way, way long time ago. Early people that uh, have probably just gotten out of the uh, the savannas of Africa, and they are um, thinking about the universe, thinking about uh, all those sorts of things. They look up, they look at the stars. Wow, I'm gonna, and all those people began to wonder, what is everything made of? And they came up with an interesting proposition, and that is that all things are made of four elements: earth, water, fire, and air. And it's an interesting thing that when we look at ancient history, the anthropologists look at early people kind, and we see that it didn't matter where the people came from, whether it was Asia or Africa or Mexico, South America, Alaska, Hawaii, it didn't matter. People throughout the world had a similar view that everything in the universe was made of earth, air, water, and fire. In Hawaii, they have very special legends about earth, air, water, and fire. They have special gods and goddesses that are attached to each one of those. So, as an example, Pele is the goddess of fire. She rules over all of the volcanoes. And the legend has it that if you ever go to Hawaii and you see volcanic rocks, those are her gemstones. They belong to her, and she gets angry if you take them off the island. You may pick them up, you may admire them, but if you put one in your suitcase and take it home, you will have bad luck until that is returned uh, to the island from which it came. So, for literally tens of thousands of years, people believed everything was made of uh, earth, water, fire, and air. Well, by the time we get to about ancient Greece, things are starting to change a little bit. People are beginning to think a little bit more, and the primarily the men are the ones who gather at a place called the Forum and think about things. Well, there was a particular person. His name was Democritus, and Democritus um, was one of these men that used to gather at the Forum. And he is the first one who thought of this concept that things are not made of earth, water, fire, and air. Now, other great thinkers of the time, like Aristotle, did believe in earth, water, fire, and air, and very learned people. So if you're thinking, well, it must have been like the common or the uneducated only believed in that, not so. The very elite, the kings and queens and emperors and philosophers all believed in earth, water, fire, and air. And Democritus came along and said, no, everything's made of these little spheres that he called atomos, indivisible small spheres. And he didn't, he never wrote about why he had that idea. Nobody ever recorded why he thought that way. And as time went on, uh, Democritus became kind of portrayed as a bit of a fool because he didn't believe what everybody else believed. And so they thought him to be perhaps drunk or high, and so for he and his followers, they were really criticized. Well, after the fall of ancient Greece, um, Europe fell into the Middle Ages, a time of castles and kings and queens and princes and knights, and the rich were still after the essence of what was making up everything around us. And these scholars were typically known as alchemists. And the alchemists were really the first chemists. They what they had in common was that they were interested in searching for something called the philosopher's stone. And it was not a brick or a rock. A stone back in that day was an elixir, a liquid. And this particular liquid, the legend had it that if you drank it, you would be eternally young and eternally beautiful if a woman, handsome if a man. And that if you poured some of this liquid onto a substance such as copper or lead, it would turn that metal into gold or silver. So not only would you live forever and be forever beautiful or handsome, you would also be incredibly wealthy. So the scholars of the day spent hours and hours and hours, days and months, sometimes years, trying to figure out where the philosopher's stone was, how they could make one. And there were very, very scholarly people in search of that. Isaac Newton was one of the people. He actually believed that the code for making the philosopher's stone was in the Bible, and that if he was able to interpret the passages and interpret the code, um, then he would be able to figure out how to make the philosopher's stone. Well, as these scholars became more plentiful and word of them pursuing the philosopher's stone spread, something kind of bad happened because they fell into conflict with somebody. They fell into conflict with somebody, and that somebody was primarily the church, your phones. And the reason they fell into that with the church is that the philosopher's stone promised that people would live forever. Well, if you know anything about the European churches and the Catholic Church, whether you're Catholic or not, you might know of some of the tenets of the religion that if a person of the Christian faith wants to live forever, then they must follow the teachings of the church. And that is the way to immortality of their soul. That is what they believe. And so the church really took offense at what these scholars were saying, that immortality and wealth was as simple as figuring out how to make this thing called the philosopher's stone. And so the church's answer to this was to vilify these people, the scholars, the alchemists, and make them into something that appeared evil. So early depictions made them look like wizards, perhaps. But notice already in this early depiction, the pointed black shoes and the rat on top of the hat and crows and a big black cauldron. And as time went on, these images became more evil appearing. And so notice the pointed hat and the black cats and the boiling cauldron, and the thoughts of them being witches and wizards, and they were persecuted. Some of them were killed. And so chemists had to take their science and go underground. And again, the portrayals of this going on in the basements of castles and the dark, dingy corridors, this is where chemistry really began. So as it went through these Middle Ages, the work of the chemists went on, and we were actually out of the 1600s, the 1700s, and into the 1800s. So only about 150 years ago, around the time of the Civil War, That's how recent the science of chemistry is, which is really pretty amazing because when we think about things like biology, biology is as ancient as humankind because ancient people killed animals to eat. And when they opened up the animals and they saw what the insides of the animals looked like, and they had to wonder, is this what was inside them? Physics. Ancient civilizations mastered physics to be able to build great cities like in South America and in Mexico, in Egypt, and in the Far East. But chemistry is a really, really recent science. So the atomic theory, okay, we are into the early 1800s before John Dalton. So now we're modern atomic theory, John Dalton, and he is the one who came up with the modern atomic theory. There are four parts to this theory. So I'm going to do these and then we're going to take just a little break. Four-part theory. What he said is he went back to what Democritus said, all things are made of atoms. Similar atoms are similar, different atoms are different. That was a huge big deal because people hadn't thought of such a thing before, that there are these things that they knew of like iron. And iron came from rocks and they had figured out how to get iron out of the rocks by heating the rocks. And that iron was different than sulfur. And all sulfur atoms were the same, had similar characteristics anyway, that they were all sulfur, and that they were all different than iron molecules or atoms. The third part of the theory, atoms combine to form molecules. So the elements themselves, those raw atoms, end up being combined into things that we know as molecules. So it's like an alphabet where we take the individual elements and we combine them in different forms and form millions of different molecules. In our language, the English language, we have 26 letters, and those 26 letters actually then are used to form millions and millions of words. The last one is that chemical reactions do not alter atoms. In other words, that sulfur and iron, if we put them together, we might get a new molecule with new characteristics, but the iron and sulfur that make it up have not changed. Okay, so we're going to take a little break. I got to stop sharing at that point so that I can